video, we're exploring the stories of 3 people who ventured into the most remote parts of Appalachia, only to come face to face with something truly terrifying in the middle of the night. I don't know about you, but this time of year, when the leaves start turning orange and falling, it's both my favorite season and the scariest time to be wandering around these mountains. Just the thought of being out there alone and suddenly hearing the crunch of footsteps in the leaves behind you. Especially at night. That's nightmare fuel for me. I hope you enjoy this video as much as I did putting it together. And most of all, I hope it keeps you up at night, the same way it did me. As always, thank you so much for being here and for keeping this channel alive. Your support means more than you could ever imagine. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Earlier this spring, I drove 4 hours into the Appalachians to a lake I've been going to for years. It sits in a narrow hollow, surrounded by ridges so thick with trees that once you drop below the crest, it feels like you're cut off from everything else. Locals call it Black Pine Lake, though most don't talk about it much. Years back, there was some kind of killing there. Details were vague and the papers barely covered it. In truth, I don't even know if the story has any real foundation or if it's just superstition. But the fact is, ever since, people from around the area have kept their distance. Every once in a while you might see tourists who stumble on it while hiking, but they never stay long. The locals won't go near it. For me, though, it became a place I kept coming back to. Quiet water, a strip of grass for a tent, and the pines circling the shore. Peaceful in a way I couldn't find anywhere else. The first day I arrived, the lake was empty like it usually was. I set my tent on a little shelf of sand and grass, stacked my pack, and let the kind of easy peace that comes from being miles from a highway settle over me. I say this because even though I live in a small town, I live right next to a highway, and even if my ears are already used to the noise, getting away from it brings me a kind of peace I can't even explain. By late afternoon, a man and a little girl appeared on the opposite shore. They were pretty far away, but at the time I was using my binoculars, so I could see them clearly. Just to make things clear, I had the binoculars because I've always loved watching birds. Not because I'm some kind of creep. The man had a trucked-in look. Well-worn boots, a camp chair, a cheap cooler, and he put up a small tent not far from the tree line. He looked older than me, closer to 37 or 40, and he looked like the kind of guy who'd been doing weekend trips for a while. The girl was maybe 6, small and held close to him when they moved. Up close, she looked like a normal kid. Scuffed shoes, a crooked ponytail, a jacket, too big for her. But there was something in her face I couldn't place then. Something that made my skin tighten in a way nothing else at the lake ever had. It was as if she moved with a certainty that didn't seem right for a child. And even the man with her didn't treat her like one. I'm telling you this because it's going to be important later. But it's only now that I'm reflecting on that first impression I had. I don't think either of them knew I was watching, which is why they acted without any social filter. That was the first impression I had of them. A feeling that something was off. But as you can imagine, it was just a first impression. And at the time, I didn't think about it the way I'm describing it now. Not long after they had arrived, they made their way over to my side of the lake and introduced themselves. The man was friendly and easy to talk to, clearly interested in the same quiet spots I liked and appreciative of how secluded Black Pine was. The little girl stayed close to him, running around and playing like a normal 6-year-old, collecting stones, climbing on driftwood, laughing at small things. But even as she acted like a child, there were moments when something about her didn't fit. Her gaze could linger in a way that felt almost deliberate, like she was aware of more than she should have been. I told myself children can be curious and strange sometimes, that maybe I was overthinking it. We talked for a while, shared some casual conversation, and by the end of the day they returned to their own campsite. I felt genuinely relieved and happy to have friendly neighbors for the night, the kind that made the woods feel safer without losing the quiet peace I loved about the lake. The next day went pretty much the same way. I'd see them occasionally on the other side of the lake, just two small figures in the distance. At one point, I had wandered a little farther from my campsite, watching a pair of birds, when something made me glance toward their sight. I honestly don't know what it was, but when I looked, my blood ran cold. The girl was in the man's arms, and it looked like they had just kissed. They were a little too intimate for a father and daughter, which made me extremely uncomfortable and made me lower my binoculars. I didn't know if I even wanted to see it, so I started walking back toward my campsite. I just hoped they wouldn't come over to talk that night. I didn't know what to make of it, and I didn't want to feel paranoid, but I also didn't want to pretend everything was fine when something about it unsettled me. After dinner, that image of the two of them was still burned into my mind. I decided I was going to sleep and think about it, or try to forget it, tomorrow. Either way, it would be a decision for the next day. A decision that, as you can probably guess, I never ended up making. That night, I woke to the sound of small, measured steps on the packed earth outside my tent. I sat up and listened, then unzipped a sliver and peeked out. The girl was standing a few yards away at the edge of my firelight, hands at her sides, head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Her face was turned toward me, the angle of her head, the steady, deliberate smile. Everything about her posture felt rehearsed, maybe intentional. I glanced at my phone. 3:10 in the morning. What the hell was she doing out there? And where was her father? I strained to hear any other sounds. The approach of her father, perhaps. But there was nothing. The forest was quiet, except for the normal noises of nighttime animals. I watched her for a long minute, counting the breaths between heartbeats. Because the adult thing to do is not panic at the sight of a child. But the whole situation was just plain bizarre. She said nothing as I watched her. She just stood there, watching me watch her. When the trance of my own panic finally eased enough for me to move, I unzipped my tent and stepped out. Her face lit up the way a child's does when they see someone they want to play with. She held out a small hand, as if to take mine. I know how that looks on paper. A grown man afraid of a 6-year-old. But fear isn't about reason. It's a body's shorthand when something registers wrong. I told myself I couldn't leave a child wandering alone in the woods at 3 in the morning. I asked her if her father was with her, and she just shook her head. Then I asked if she wanted me to walk her back to their campsite, and she lifted her hand toward me again, this time with a faint, almost mischievous smile on her lips. The last thing I wanted was to take her hand. I felt like a trapped animal, aware that something was wrong. But she was just a child, and I didn't want my panic to show. So, I slipped my hand into hers. Her fingers were small and shockingly strong, the kind of grip that shouldn't be there on such a small hand. We walked in single file through scrub and underbrush, The girl didn't speak. She padded ahead with a practiced, steady pace, and when I tried to ask anything, where her campsite was, whether her father was awake, her expression flickered and hardened in a way that made my throat close. She tilted her head and asked me why I was talking to her like she was a child. It was a single thought that detonated inside my chest. I had assumed she was a child because that's what she looked like. I realized I could not remember ever hearing her called daughter or kid, or any sign that they were related. The man had spoken to me, yes, but the casual details I'd filled in my head, father and daughter, weren't solid. I asked her what she meant by that, and if she wasn't supposed to be camping with her father. She just smiled again and said that I was about to find out. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw him. I don't know how long he had been standing there, just a few feet away from us, staring in our direction with a knife in his hand. Not a hunting knife for fish, or a camper's folding tool. It was a blade held in the way someone holds it when they plan where it will go. Everything in my body told me to pull my hand back, to run, to do anything but stand there. When I tried to step away, the girl's fingers tightened around mine as if she was hooked to me. Her grip was far stronger than it should have been for a small hand. It took both of my hands to wrench free. Then I just ran as fast as I could, without looking back. I think what saved me wasn't exactly speed, but endurance. I've run several marathons in my life, and because of that, even though they initially chased me, at some point I lost them. They must have stopped to catch their breath. I don't know whether they turned back or simply gave up because my distance became too great. When dawn cracked clean over the ridges, I stopped and oriented myself by the way the light fell, and, exhausted, made my way to a faint trail I recognized. I wasn't on the trail that led back to their campsite, and thank God for that. I just wanted to get back to my car, which I finally did by the end of that day. I drove into the nearest town and sat in the police station for a long time. I described the camp location, pointed out the ridge and the fallen pine I used as a landmark, and told them about the man and the girl. They took my statement and said they would check the area. A few days later, a detective called to say they had searched the hollow and found nothing. No tent and no tracks. By this point, I knew perfectly well that they didn't believe my story. Those two had erased any evidence that I, or they, had ever been there. I still go hiking in the Appalachians. I still find other lakes and other hollowed-out places to sleep under the stars. But I haven't been back to Black Pine Lake. The valley that once felt like an honest refuge now keeps its distance in my head. The thing that unsettles me most isn't the missing gear or the knife or the way those two moved together in the dark. It's that when I think back to her face, the smile was not childish or malicious in any straightforward way. It was precise. It was practiced. It was a look someone older would use when they were certain of what they were about to do. But if she was really an adult, why had she pretended to be a child on that first night? It probably had all been a trick to lure me in. I'm no good at introductions, so I'll just get straight to the point about what happened to me 7 years ago. I was in West Virginia, spending several days backpacking through the woods. I was already about 20 miles from the nearest road, and for the first 2 days, I hadn't seen another person. It was mid-fall, so the air bit at my hands more than in summer, but I had the right gear, and I was fine with the cold. I've always preferred hiking this time of year, mostly because my favorite sound since I was a kid has been the crunch of leaves underfoot. Don't ask me why. I can't explain it. I just love it. That's the main reason most of my hikes end up happening in the fall, when the ground is covered in dry leaves and every step makes that sound I never get tired of. That particular morning, I made a quick coffee on my pocket stove and headed for the next site, 12 miles away, which in this part of the US is a proper day's hike for someone with experience. 5 hours into it, I heard footsteps ahead on the trail. I looked up, and a man was coming toward me, heading the opposite way. I hadn't expected to see anyone, so I nodded and kept walking. He looked as surprised as I was. At least a look crossed his face I couldn't read as soon as he saw me. He didn't smile back, and I think that little detail made me notice he didn't have anything with him. It's rare to see someone literally in the middle of nowhere, wearing only the clothes on their back. But I ended up ignoring it because it was likely he was camping nearby and had just gone for a walk, so I didn't think more of it. I didn't even find it odd that he hadn't smiled. You'd be surprised how many sketchy people I've run into on the trails over the years. This was just another one. So I kept going toward the area where I intended to camp. I'd never been there before, but at the time, I was part of a Facebook group that shared tips about hikes. One of the guys in the group had said there was a great spot to camp there. I'll admit I was disappointed when I arrived. The guy had said not only was it great for pitching a tent, it had an incredible view. The tent part was true. The ground there was soft and flat, but the view was nowhere to be seen. I thought maybe I'd gone to the wrong spot, even though I'd followed all the directions. Anyway, I was tired and not up for searching for another site. This one was as good as any. I set up the tent, made dinner, and sat there watching the stars. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke up with a numb hand from a weird sleeping position and no sense of time. That's when I saw it was only 11 p.m., but I was tired, so it was time to turn in. One thing I always do before going to bed is pee. I hate waking up in the middle of the night needing to go, so I never go to bed without taking a leak. Even when I don't really have to, there's always a little something. I stepped away a bit, into the trees. It's annoying to do it where other people will set up tents. If you've ever gone hiking like I do and stayed in spots where people usually camp, then you probably know that smell in the morning. The awful stench of dried piss. I can't stand people who do that, so I wasn't about to add to it. Instead, I walked off toward the trees, into an area where setting up a campsite would have been impossible. That's when, in the middle of peeing, I heard footsteps. Instinctively, I hid behind a tree. Not a minute later, I saw the man appear. It was the same man I'd seen about 4 hours earlier, walking the opposite way. Obviously, that was an alarm bell. Again, he had nothing on him. Had he followed me here? But how? Had he tracked my footprints like some kind of tracker? I stayed hidden while I watched him walk over to my tent and peek inside. The tent was open except for the bug netting, which was closed. He was clearly looking for me. I swear my first thought was that maybe he needed something, and being the only person out there, he'd turned back to check. Maybe he was lost. But then I saw him walk toward the trees, on the side opposite where I was, and hide behind a bush. I could see part of his body, but there was no doubt he was crouched there, waiting. That's when I realized he must have had other intentions. He was waiting for me to come back to the campsite, maybe to catch me off guard. I stayed there for hours, hiding behind the tree and only partially able to see parts of him. I had nothing on me. Everything was inside the tent, except for a small flashlight. I didn't even have my phone. I thought about confronting him, but I didn't know if he had a weapon or what he intended to do. At some point I lost sight of him, and that's when I got truly terrified. The ground was thick with dry leaves, so if he'd moved, I would have heard it. But at the same time, I couldn't see him where he had been. I shrank back behind the tree again, and for what felt like too long, I just listened. Convinced that any second he'd find me and I'd have to fight for my life. But nothing. Morning came, and there was no sign of the man anywhere. I ran to the campsite, grabbed the first aid kit and my phone, and bolted through the woods. I didn't know if he was still out there watching me, so I ran as if he was. I only stopped running when I felt far enough and safe enough to breathe and think about what to do next. I didn't want to go back, so I just kept going until I found the next trail and could ask for help. But the truth is, when I finally reached the road and got a ride from a guy passing by, I didn't have the courage to tell anyone else what had happened except him. After hearing my story, he just asked if I wasn't exaggerating a bit and laughed in my face. That's when I realized how stupid I'd sound to someone who hadn't been there that night. So I never reported it to the police. They probably would have laughed at me too, and nothing would have come of it. But I know what I lived through. And I know that man was hiding there waiting for me. I don't know what he wanted, but I know I reacted the way I needed to. I've lived alone with my dad since I was a baby. My mom died not long after giving birth to me, so it's always just been the two of us. My grandparents were never around. My dad's relationship with them is terrible, so he's the only family I've ever had. When I was a kid, it wasn't always easy for us to connect, but by the time I hit my teenage years, something changed. I can't say exactly what it was, but we started getting closer, doing things together. One of those things was hiking and camping in the woods. We live really close to the Smoky Mountains, so once I was old enough to handle it, we started taking trips out there. This story happened 8 years ago, when I was 16. Even though I was still young, I'd grown up fast. I was tall, broad-shouldered, and people often thought I was at least 25, when really I was just a teenager. I mention this because I'm convinced the way I looked played a part in how things unfolded. It was late September, and that section of the Smokies, already one of the less popular areas, was basically deserted that time of year. At the start of the trail, we crossed paths with a friendly couple, but after that, we didn't see another soul. By the time we reached the unmarked part of the woods, it felt like we were completely alone. The plan was to hike out to a waterfall we'd visited once before, camp there for a couple of nights, and then head back. Depending on our pace, the whole trip would take about a week. The first night went fine, and the mood between us was good. At least, I thought so. Until the next morning when my dad casually asked if I'd gotten up or heard anything during the night. I hadn't. I'd slept straight through. I've always been a heavy sleeper, even out in the middle of the forest. He knew that, so I guess that's why he didn't push the subject. We packed up camp and kept moving toward the second site. Without a defined trail, it was slower going, and sometimes we had to reroute around thick brush or fallen trees. Still, we made steady progress and finally reached our spot around 7 p.m. It wasn't the same place we'd camped at the year before, but honestly, it was better. The trees gave more cover, and the ground was flat enough for the tent. It felt secure. But around 9 p.m., we heard it for the first time. A woman's scream. We froze. I'll never forget the way my dad looked at me in that moment, wide-eyed, like his mind was racing just as fast as mine. It didn't make sense. We were supposed to be alone out there. And if we weren't, why would anyone be screaming like that in the middle of nowhere? We strained to figure out the direction it had come from, but it was too vague. Pitch black woods, an unfamiliar area. It wasn't exactly the safest idea to just wander blindly toward it. Still, we couldn't ignore it either. We got up, walked a little ways from camp, just enough so that if she screamed again, we'd have a better sense of where it was coming from. Minutes later, another scream. Louder this time. Sharper. My dad turned to me and told me to stay behind at camp. I knew better than to argue when he got like that. Firm. Unmoving. But I was stubborn too, and there was no way I was letting him go alone. I nodded like I was going to listen, then waited until he was far enough ahead before following quietly. I wasn't trying to be reckless. I was just 16, caught somewhere between wanting to prove myself and refusing to feel like a kid. We walked for what felt like forever, every step crunching against the silence of the woods. My pulse was pounding, and I could feel the cool night air sticking to my skin, heavy with the damp smell of leaves. Every time a branch snapped under my boot, I flinched, certain the sound would give me away. Finally, through the trees, the shape of a cabin appeared. From where I hung back, half hidden behind the trunks, I could barely make it out. It looked old, half collapsed in places, like nobody had lived there in years. My dad didn't try to go inside. He just called out from the doorway, his voice steady but cautious. That's when she screamed again. And then, almost instantly, a man appeared in the doorway. He was holding what looked like a metal pipe in his hands. I saw my dad hesitate, take one small step back. That was all the man needed to feel like he had the upper hand. He moved forward, slow at first, then faster, raising the pipe slightly. I don't know what came over me. I spotted a thick branch on the ground and grabbed it. Heart racing, I ran straight out of the trees toward my dad. I must have looked bigger than I realized. 16, but tall, broad, wearing a black hoodie, gripping that branch like a weapon. The man froze, then spun on his heel and bolted into the trees. Only then did it hit me how dangerous the whole thing had been. If he'd had a gun, or if there had been more than one of them, it could have ended badly, really badly. My dad looked at me in a way that scared me. I thought he was about to start yelling, maybe even ground me until I moved out. But then his expression softened. He put his hand on my shoulder and simply thanked me. He looked tired. He looked old. I think he realized that if I hadn't shown up, things would have gone really bad. Inside the cabin, we found a woman, tied up against what looked like the frame of an old fireplace. She was terrified, shaking, clearly with no idea how she'd even ended up there. We stayed in the cabin with her until help arrived. At least there. We had some shelter if the man decided to come back. All through the night we heard noises outside. Twigs snapping. Movement in the brush. Every time, I thought for sure he was back. Maybe armed this time. But morning came, and with it, rescue. A helicopter flew the woman to the hospital while we were escorted out of the Smokies. We never went back to that part of the mountains again. As far as I know, the man was never caught. I don't know what became of the woman either. My dad and I still hike sometimes, but it's different now. That feeling we used to have, that bad things only happen to other people, disappeared for good that night.